Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville. I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who can eat lead and take out 100 men using only a wet napkin.
Tim Longo. Is that a line that he says?
That is a line that he says to Marion, where he's actually saying, I know you think I can eat lead and take out 100 men using only a wet napkin, but sometimes you need more than just a pistol to, it's basically because we can jump right into it. We're playing Outcast, by the way, this is our final episode. At the end of the game, they do this thing, which, lots of games and even, movies or books or whatever do, where they take away all the tools. He gets captured in a very uncutter way, in my opinion. But he gets captured and all the stuff gets taken away, and then he only has the HK. And so you have a fight with only the HK, and Marion is like, she already got in there, and she managed to do the thing you were trying to do. It might be getting the Mon in Okar, which is the forest world. Or something. No, it's not that. It's something else. But it's right after you get them on in Okar. If that's your last Mon, there's a thing you can do, which takes the game to completion. And then there's this big conversation, and she's like, well, then I can just sneak into the palace and get the fifth Mon. And you're like, well, that's not going to work. What if I have to back you up? I'm even starting to talk like Cutter Slade now. And that's when he basically says, I know you think I'm this super guy, but, come on, there's 1 million Fbrccn soldiers in there or whatever. It's a whole thing.
That's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very, end of the end of the movie kind of thing where what am I going to do? I only have X. But then they do give you all your weapons back for the final fight. But this was crazy. They basically shut you into this arena, which is the palace that's in the center of that big city, Okriana. They're like, okay, well, we got you, we got you your weapons back. Unfortunately, we couldn't get all your ammo. And I have to say I was really ticked because I had bought so much Uzi, so much Uzi ammo. I had 700 Uzi ammo that I just bought. I had made and I bought, and I basically spent all my resources because this is my gun. This is the gun that I use. It's fully upgraded. It only upgrades 2 levels, but whatever. It was this is all I really need. I barely used any other weapons in the game other than the HK and the Uzi. And they're like, here you go. Unfortunately, we couldn't get any ammo for your weapons. So, you only have what's in there. But depending on how many subquests you did, those people have gotten together and scrimped and saved and found more ammo for you.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, well, that's good. I mean, hopefully it's hundreds of Uzi, because I did a lot of quests. When I looked at the end, they tell you how many. I did 63% of bonus quests.
Oh, good job.
And that meant 93% overall quest completion. So the main story and the 63% adds up to 93%. I'd have to think about the math there. But anyway, basically those things that are on the checklist of things to do in the UI. So and then so they tell me that, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And I go and I look at my inventory and my Uzi has 30 bullets. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm so angry right now. I was so angry. I was really
30.
Really,
how does that translation work?
That was not cool because I had 600 or whatever before I went in there, before I went to this final set of things. And then I had 300 or 30. And I was like, okay, well, I can fire that gun for 3 seconds because it shoots so many bullets. I'll have to use the HK, which also had 30 bullets. And there was some ammo in the place. Other weapons had ammo. So I was using the other weapons basically for the first time because I happened to have some ammo for them that the villagers had gotten together, all these people I had helped. So
yeah, the flamethrower, once you fire that thing, the ammo goes away very fast.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it's the fuel, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
Disappears in a heartbeat. Yeah, I didn't really use that one the whole game, even though it was one of the earliest ones I bought. I don't think I did fire it once, but I ended up having to load from a save because the thing I was firing at killed me. So
I misunderstood how the sniper rifle was working, and in retrospect, I shouldn't have because I think it generally was a pretty good feedback on it. But because it's like I was like, oh, interesting, it's a sniper rifle, but it's like it shoots gas pellets. That's interesting. I've never seen
yeah,
that before. Turns out, no, that's just sleeping gas. You're just
right.
tranquilizing them, and
Exactly.
and they kept coming back, and I
And
was
then
like,
get back
where'd
up.
this guy come from?
Yeah,
And I was
yeah,
like, I killed you. And then I was like, oh, wait, they just fell asleep.
yeah.
That's makes sense.
Yeah, it's called the SLNT for silent. It's the
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Well, the silent part I got, and I was
yeah,
like, silenced sniper rifle that shoots gas pellets, I thought was clever,
yeah,
but it's just sleeping gas. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. Not
uh,
not like in other games where you have
non-lethal.
to
I mean,
sleep forever. Yeah,
the fact that they had a non-lethal option, hypothetically, although I don't think you can play the whole game that way. Although I would love to see. It seems like this game is beloved enough that there might be a YouTube out there for somebody who
yeah.
has played a non-lethal run of this game in like stealth mode because they do have stealth. But that sounds to me very difficult and very frustrating because
Well,
the stealth mechanics are not very clear.
you'd also have to get to where you can buy the sniper rifle.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that would be possible.
anything's possible.
Mm, maybe
Well,
it's possible.
you mean to the
You have to
yeah,
be able
well,
to get. You have to be able to get. I guess you can get to Talonzar. Oh, well, it's guarded.
yeah,
So
you
if
have
you
to
could
get
stealth to
into
get into that, then I think you could play the whole game not lethal.
yeah, it's definitely would be challenging.
Oh, it'd be
I,
very challenging. I would
yeah,
not want to do that. That does
well
not
the
sound fun to me.
no, it doesn't. The game doesn't support it that well. I think it hoped that it would, but it didn't end up fulfilling that fully. Though, so technically it's in there and they train you up on it and all that, but yeah, I don't think it was supported in a way that isn't just terrible. But the one thing I will say that I was scared of at first and then realized it's not as bad is swimming with fish around is doable.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so it's like there's probably ways you can kind of sidetrack stuff and sneak through stuff that by
Some fish anyway.
some fish, not the ones in the water planet. Yeah, those
Yeah,
are
not in
deadly.
the water. Yeah, continent
But
or whatever it is.
yeah, even those though, if you're super clever, you can kind of dodge them, but it's not easy. Yeah, it's almost impossible. So anyway, yeah, it's quite a game.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as you can hear, I didn't finish the game as usual. Brett did, but I'm pretty. I would say I got pretty far in all but the tree world.
Yeah.
So I kind of saw most of each of those areas. And I think each of them are really pretty fleshed out and really interesting and different. Um, and that is the crux of one of my topics. But
The tree world actually has the most difficult puzzle in the game.
oh
And it's only because I went to the tree world early that I was able to. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. So I went to the tree world pretty early because you need the ceremonial dagger to give somebody
yeah,
somewhere else.
it's for the taxes thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's for the taxes. Okay. So you need the ceremonial dagger for the tax quest, which is in Talonzar, which is the big city in the desert. And so I went, I was like, well, I'm just going to do as much as I can here, and then I'll go on to the other worlds. But then once I was in Talonzar or Okar, which is the forest world, I was like, okay, well, let me just see what's around here. And I found, I rescued the shamas there. See, I'm constantly struggling with the words. I rescued the holy dude, and got the knife, escorted him back near the portal. I was like, well, let me just look around a bit while I'm here. And I discovered this empty. It wasn't empty. There was a camp with some of the enemies in it. And I killed the enemies, and I was like, huh, okay. that's what's going on here. The Shamaz talked about a map, and he was explaining the map. I was like, okay, well, I'll come back for that later because I really do want to get back to Talonzar, and I just kind of explored, and then I left the other half on the map alone. But there was a puzzle in that camp that I'm like, I don't know what this is. And I came back to it much later, and it's like, I still don't know what this is. So I just went and was doing other stuff. And I was kind of like, I didn't have a lot left to do. That ended up being a very complicated puzzle involving the map I mentioned that the Shamaz gave me. And then you had to finish this quest, I think you had to finish this quest in the water world with the guy who wanted to shoot the Gorgor, which is like a big dinosaur thing. Oru, the hunter. I think you had to finish his quest to be part of this because Oru talks about this great hunter who actually lives in the forest area. So you end up, having to talk to that guy as well, and he explains some things. And like you need those two pieces to even understand what you need to do for the puzzle. But then the puzzle is a sound puzzle.
Oh.
So there's like these 4 pipes that you have to get from these 4 locations that are marked on this map, which is abstract. It's not like just the same as the mini map that's in the game. It's like an abstraction of the space. And you're like, okay, I ended up finding this piece in this one area. I didn't know what it was. I didn't connect that it went to this sound puzzle even until I talked to these 2 people, and they explained like, okay, you need to find the pipes, and so you can put them in there. And they're like, but it's some old tune. And I'm like, okay, great. I have like 4, I could do the thing where I just like try all whatever 24 combinations, but I don't want to spend an hour trying 24 combinations. It's actually not that many because turns out there are 2 duplicate pipes, but I didn't know that at the time. So I went back to Talonzar because there's all these people playing music.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to ask about that.
So I went to each person I could find. I just was walking around until I would hear somebody playing music, and I'd talk to them, and Cutter would basically be like, how much can I pay you to not play? Which was hilarious. And so I was paying people off. I was like, well, maybe there's a subquest here that I haven't found the start of, but I'm just doing the steps. But then I ultimately found a guy who was like, here's a bit of music I really like. It's ancient, or whatever. And it's the tune. And like he plays the thing multiple times, and then you can go and you're like, oh, okay, I actually know that like there's 2 notes that are the same. There are 2 pipes that are the same. And then there's these 2 others. And then the puzzle was really easy to solve. That gives you 1 key. There's another place.
Oh, man.
That gives you 1 key to the final temple area where the Mon is hidden. Getting those pipes was difficult. I'm not going to even go into it. But then there's a second key. Remember the construction puzzle you liked so much?
Yeah.
There's a second one of those. So now I understand why the construction puzzle was in the game. Oh. It's because there's a second puzzle where there are 2 rocks hanging on ropes.
Oh, no.
And you have to get them, and there's a huge boulder. And you have to get them swinging in unison hard enough to dislodge the boulder.
Oh, my gosh.
And it's actually not that hard to do, really. I mean, you're like kind of going back and forth between them and getting them both to get more momentum. And occasionally you might have to slow one down just to get it back in sync. But it actually didn't take that many. It was actually easier to do that than I had. I had more trouble stopping the construction puzzle, with that guy than I did dealing with this boulder. But that rolls down and clogs this river, which opens up an area because the waterfall isn't there anymore that you can now get to. And oh my God, it was a really cool, like, whoa, like I didn't expect that.
Yeah, wow.
It was a very Indiana Jones adventure moment, wow, holy cow. That block, that key, and that was where the second key was. And that's what I needed to get the final Mon I needed.
Very adventure gamey.
The fourth Mon I needed. Yeah. The 5th one's in the palace at the end of the game. So
yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, very adventure gaming.
Yeah. This game, I mean, I think we talked about it last episode, though it's been a while, and especially a little bit in terms of like Beyond Good and Evil or Anachronox, or some of the games of the era that we've played that are just like weird enough games and doing like charting their own course and
Yeah.
doing kind of whatever they think is right for their direction, I guess. And then also just constant surprises. It just was an era where the budgets were and the team sizes, everything was modest enough to where you could be nimble like that. Again, I think indie games have kind of taken this mantle over now because AAA, it's like if you're going to spend this much money on a level, you're just going to have to map it all out, and it's going to
Yeah.
have to be this exact thing, and you can't. It's got to be similar to this other thing because you're reusing content probably, and there's a lot of reuse going on, so you can't really like have a custom waterfall thing. Like
Right. Yeah.
I'm exaggerating, but it's just harder
Well,
to do.
yeah, yeah, it is harder to do it. Yeah, yeah, and this had a lot of that.
Yeah,
Kind of everywhere. Yeah, again, you're completely right. I mean, they had this kind of voxel train system, which will let them do a lot of things, and then because you don't have to go super deep on any of the verbs in terms of cost, like the animation for swimming, right, takes somebody half a day, right, or whatever. Maybe not quite that bad, but like takes very little time. Like you don't need 100 animators to make this game. Is my point.
mm-hmm.
Or whatever. The models, of course, all the models are very simple. The buildings are, you know, 8 polys or 20 polys or whatever. I mean, you can see all the polys. You could count how many polys things are. And, when you're modeling kind of at that scale, the hard work is like making that read. But even making something like that read is a lot easier. It takes a lot less time than making the 100,000 or 100 million poly version of that building. That's going to be automatically decimated or whatever down to reasonable rendering levels, or not even if you're using Unreal's nanite blah blah. So
Yeah.
it's just a
No,
different time.
yeah, it's a good point that the readability is the context is completely different in these eras of 3D games,
Mm-hmm.
and so the readability is a different proposition as you get more photoreal or more detailed in general. Then, yeah, as we know, it
Yeah,
becomes more complicated because you have too many details in a way. That's
yeah,
always a question of like how pixel dense is something, because the more it is, the less clear the things that you need to be clear
right. Well,
are.
that's how we get the yellow paint problem, right? Is that
Yeah,
now you have to show somebody everything that's important, which of course then makes the rest of it not important. And so it's like, in
yeah,
a
it's a
way,
really
it's
weird.
you're spending all this effort to make these things look amazing just so you can show what's important, so that they don't pay much attention to the things that you spent all that money on.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
crazy where we are right now.
yeah, yeah. That's why, I mean, I was actually reading. You probably saw the article. It's the Switch's anniversary, but thus also Breath of the Wild's
Breath of the
anniversary.
Wild, yeah, I saw that there
And
was an article. I haven't had a chance to
yeah,
read
and
it.
it was a simple article. I think they just wanted to hit on Breath of the Wild, to be honest, and the anniversary. There wasn't much to it, but they were making the point that it's still probably the best game on the system, even with the sequel. And the reason I bring it up in this context is that it still is a shining light for modern game development, where they made decisions like the climbing, which is essentially Shadow of the Colossus, of course, but
Yeah,
um, the climbing um, the climbing aspect of the game takes away a lot of those challenges of visual language issues, right? Because it's like, well, I can climb on any surface, and you make those kind of really fundamentally hard and big decisions, which probably very difficult to do for them. But it collapses everything down. They can still have it be pretty high fidelity, even though that game is somewhat stylized. Um, but it collapses down that problem where it's like, well, you don't need ledges the same way you do in a
Assassin's
Tomb Raider
Creed
game or
or Tomb
something, right?
Raider, or
Yeah, yeah.
Uncharted.
Yeah, it just takes away that problem, and that's another reason why I love the um, Team Eco games, right? That they were very, very consistent and very pure with their visual languages and
Yeah.
stuff.
And small teams that worked for long periods rather
Yeah,
than
exactly. Yeah.
big teams that had to crunch everything into 2 years, right? It also gives you time to refine your play, which is of course something that these older titles didn't have the luxury of, because the budgets were small, because the market was small, relatively speaking, to today, right? So this game is, almost 26 years ago, and they're looking to sell, let's say 1 million copies would be amazing, right? To hit it out of the park. 1999 PC game, right? Because the margins were really good on PC games at the time. CD cost of goods was basically nothing, close to nothing, and there was no cut to pay to anybody except your publisher, if you had a publisher. I mean, they did. And I want to mention, while I'm mentioning the developer was actually Belgian, and Infogrames is French. I got that in the Discord. So I'm mentioning that
I
here
saw that.
because, I wanted to make sure we didn't miss that. Because
Yeah, I
that was
forget
an error on our part.
who
I
mentioned
think
that,
it was
yeah.
Fbrccn.
Yeah,
was
right.
who mentioned that. So Appeal was a Belgian developer. But anyway, my point being, like, they were constrained in time because their budget couldn't be huge. That's also true of Eco or Shadow of the Colossus teams, but it could be larger and longer, thus longer, right? So it's like, well, it's still only 30 people or whatever, but it's 6 years or something like that. So
Yeah.
not
Yeah,
everybody
those
can
are
be Blizzard and spend 7 years making something, and 100 people, 200 people, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, and even that, I think the ship is
Yeah, they don't do that anymore.
well, it's just that model is, even for Blizzard, is now, it's breaking under the pressure.
Yeah, it's too
whatever.
expensive even for them.
Yeah. This sort of like ship it when it's ready mentality seems to be going away, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But also, I think, fortunately, because I think it's kind of delusional in a way, and it probably creates. We've heard that it creates pretty stressed cultures inside for the team.
Yeah.
When you have that approach.
Yeah,
So it's an interesting.
The nice thing about picking a deadline is, like, well, if that's when it has to be ready, now we have to make decisions about what can be ready by that date instead of the other way around.
Yeah.
So.
And as listeners know, I'm a huge Blizzard fan from way back and still am, and appreciate all those games still. I did eventually get the Warcraft remaster, and I'm starting Warcraft 1 again.
Wow.
Like 6 missions in, because I wanted to just like see the new stuff and play it. And I don't know. We'll see.
Whereas I still haven't played Warcraft 3. So,
well, I do want to get there eventually, because that does. They had yet another. I know we're off base, but yeah, another update of that. So it looks pretty cool. But anyway, yeah. So small team, and I just think Outcast is doing so many different things, including the voxels, so it's like, it's a fascinating game. I'm glad we played it. Not that I'm winding down, because I know we still have some topics to hit, but I'm glad we played it. I yet again, because I think the podcast constantly surprises me, because it's like, you always hear about the games that at least neither of us have played. We always have heard of the games, but for whatever reason hadn't played them. So therefore, they're not really on our radar for being meaningful. And then once we do play them, like this one, I'm trying to think of another one, maybe Dwarf Fortress.
Anachronox,
Anachronox, yeah, it's like you hear of them, but they weren't like in our consciousness. And then you're just so surprised and delighted about, like, oh man, this is what this is.
Yeah.
This
for you, Beyond Good and Evil. You had played a
little bit.
Yeah,
no, I had only played a little bit. Yeah, but where that game goes, especially, but and this one just really, Last Express is another one that comes to mind. Like, you always heard about it. You're like, yeah, it's kind of a cult, one of the great adventure games. And having worked at LucasArts, it's like adventure games were, really just part of the culture. Not having played that, and then finally playing it, and how different and swinging for the fences it was. So yeah, it's this game. Outcast it definitely didn't disappoint, even though I didn't get to finish it. Which I can segue to one of my topics with.
Please do.
And I was calling it plate spinning, and I think you know what I mean by that. Like they did an interesting thing with the structure of the games, because the opening region you kind of can finish before you leave,
Yeah.
if you are kind of a completionist and do all that stuff. I guess you don't have to, but it's possible to. And then you get to the next zone, which logically is the city. I guess doesn't have to be.
Yeah, it's really
Um,
direct. As we talked about it, you're really directed there, though.
yeah, yeah. So we'll just say that logically the next one, yeah. And they give you, just like the first one, they give you the sort of like conceit of the main mission you need to do to, get to the next step, um, which is the kind of tax thing. But what ends up happening is it kind of unravels from there, and you
Right.
get these tendrils of quests that not only are one quest begets the next quest, and you can't actually go directly after the tax thing like you could in the previous zone. You have to do all these other sub things before you can do that. They then also send you to other zones to even complete some of the quests, like the dagger one you mentioned. And so I was actually pretty surprised about how fractured it then becomes, not in a bad way, but I was kind of expecting to do kind of go zone by zone. But the state that I'm in and where I stopped, and a little bit kind of why I lost my steam on this one was, oh man, I have basically, other than the tree world, which I hadn't gone to yet, and I actually have 2 or 3 quests I need to do there, like the dagger one.
Yep.
I have like all the zones are sort of like 3/4 of the way done. You know,
Right. Right.
that's what it feels like.
Right.
And I can't complete them until I go do something in another zone. So it's sort of like, in when games like this, mainly just because of my day job, I'm always imagining the flowcharts that somebody made or didn't make,
I mean,
for
let's be
how.
fair, Tim. You're always imagining flowcharts.
Yeah, that's true. Life is a flowchart, a series of flowcharts, and with different symbols and different eras. But you can kind of see, the flowchart here of like the mission tree about how what relates to what. And I have so many plates I'm spinning now about like, um, it's hard to like pick my focus and go for it. And so you can't like brute force your way through finishing a zone and getting them on. Now you have to actually kind of bounce around,
Yeah.
and do all these different things, which is, in under a time constraint like we have, even though we did get an extra week. Uh,
Well, sort of. When you lose power for several days, you're not getting a
Yeah.
full week.
No, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't actually get to utilize that time wisely. But we are generally for the podcast under a time constraint.
Right. Right.
It's hard to. I usually hit that like, decision paralysis problem where I'm like, oh man, I have like 10 things I have to do to move anything forward. And as a funny side story to that, I was like, forget it. I'm not gonna play their game. I'm gonna try to finish this zone anyway. And I kind of misunderstood with the lava planet, like what was going on at the end point, sort of like on the map, where if you keep going past the bridge that you sabotage and all that,
Yeah.
what was going on there. Because I hadn't done the whole zone. And later I found out, because I'd finished more of the zone, what was going on with the story. So I kind of went there early, and I kind of subverted some of the stuff. And I think I might have even cheesed some of the collision. And I got through the whole gauntlet there into the end,
Oh, cool.
where the cells were,
Yeah, the Shamaz, and you didn't
but I
have a
didn't
key.
I didn't have the keys, and I didn't know what they were. So
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? I'm just going to use some dynamite, and I'm
Yeah,
going
you
to,
can do that. Did you kill the
and
Shamaz?
I killed the Shamaz. And I
Amazing.
was like,
It's so
oh,
cool though that you could do that. Like,
yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Yes,
it's not a
yeah.
result for the Shamaz, and doesn't it means you can't, you can't
Well, it,
complete
it,
that
it
zone.
failed the mission. No, it
Yeah,
failed the
yeah,
mission, and I
yeah,
immediately stopped. But it was cool that I got there, and I was like, and also once I got the keys and got the story, then I knew what that was, because I
yeah.
was like, oh, that's where they are.
Right.
But like I still have to go back to the city to get the thing from that one kid to fix the windmill, and we talked about the fetch quest itis that it has. already, but it is also your key is in another castle. Oh, your
Yeah,
key
yeah,
is in another. So it's that
yeah.
problem too, where I'm
You're
like,
constantly moving the goalpost in the game.
really?
Yeah,
Yeah. Do I? Okay. Now I need to go back to the city to get
yeah.
this windmill thing
I have to
to
get this part made. Yeah, yeah.
to get a part for a thing that I was asked to sabotage. By the way.
Yeah, yes, I know. The
So it's
worst.
like,
The worst.
I was like,
I was also annoyed. It's
can
like,
you
what do you
can you
mean?
guys get on the same page here, because this
Yeah.
is wasting my time.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Earth is like imploding as we speak.
Yeah.
Don't forget,
Well, so the thing is that actually a lot of this would be less time wasty if we had read the effing manual, as they say.
Oh, okay, great.
So because there's a gadget in your inventory, and there's 3 of them, I believe. It
I
may be
have
4.
them.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you start the game with them. Like they're not something you have to.
Oh, I thought I found at least one, but maybe not.
Maybe that's
But,
how I get. I don't remember. I don't remember getting them, so I assume they were always there. But whatever it is, they're in the manual. They're one of the gadgets. It's called an F link. I forget what the F stands for, and I don't care because now I have this fake language in my head. Okar, Ramzar, blah blah blah.
it's
I
called
know all the
Feliport.
words. I call a what?
A Feliport.
Yeah. Is it really? Did you look it up?
No, no,
No,
I
you're
just
making
made
that
that
up.
up.
Okay. Anyway, it's a 2-part device. The first time you use it, you basically place a town portal destination, and the second time you use it, you teleport to that town portal in the same world. So you're not allowed to teleport from one world to another. I don't know what happens if you do that. If it just fails, or if something bad happens. So you can drop your F-Link thing at the portal when you enter a world, and just keep track in your brain or by writing it down which one of those things you've done, you've used in the world that you're in, so that when you're like, I need to go somewhere else, you can teleport right to that thing. It picks up the crystal and puts the thing back together so that you can reuse it. And then you step through the portal and you immediately do the same thing again. And when I found that, like, I was like, oh, I wish I had known about this
Yeah.
40 hours ago, because a lot of those hours were like, oh, I have to go to this other world. Because like you, I was trying to advance I was like, I'm going to push this as far as it can go, even if I have to go somewhere else. Instead of like, I'm just going to stay here. I'd be like, okay, he wants this. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm going back to Talonzar or whatever, to Okriana, to get the blah blah, and bring it back here. And that's like, I run all the way back to the gate. I run through the gate. I go in through the city. I probably have to fight some guards. I get to the guy. I go back to the portal, and I step through the portal. I run back to the guy who wants the thing. It's like several of those steps could be much shorter if I knew to teleport back to the thing. So later in the game, I was zipping around. I was just like, oh, I need to go to Okar from Talonzar or from Shamazar. It's like, I know how to do that. Blip, 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 and I just would zip around.
So you can't take your creature with you then, probably.
I don't know. I didn't use the creature except in Shamazar.
Oh, I brought it. It's with me everywhere.
Oh yeah, no, I just left it in Shamazar. I never took it anywhere else.
Interesting, because you can just write it through the portal.
Oh yeah, I think I did that once. I think I did that once into Talonzar, and then it wasn't there because I got off of it and got into combat, and then I couldn't find it, and I had to go back to Shamazar to get it. I was like, I'm not doing that again.
Yeah. So it is cumbersome to use, yeah, but because you can't use items while you're on it, so you'd have to get off and then activate the F-Link,
or to talk to anybody, and in the city in particular, talking to people is something you're doing all the time. Like, you're walking around and there are so many merchants that you have to talk to about your weapons. There are so many people and upgrades for your weapons.
Yeah. He just moves so slowly.
Side quests. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I kept it with me. But yeah, it's agreed. The city, it's silly to kind of run around on that thing. But yeah, definitely. It's funny. The way that they implemented that is really fascinating, because I did try using one once, and then it did what you explained. But because I didn't know what it was doing, I was like, this is a weird device. What is, and then I just put it away.
It's the one thing I wished had tutorialization in the game.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there's
But
other things too that I never did anything with, like the dynamite you can set off remotely. That's another gadget. I think that's the clapper. Um, that you can basically place dynamite someplace where you know the guards are going to be, and then like remotely detonate it.
so I started using the other ones because they're more straightforward, like the
Yeah,
invisibility or
yeah, and
the
I never used any of those.
hologram.
Yeah, yeah.
There's also like a landmine essentially.
Hmm.
And then the dynamite I would use sometimes too but I would shoot it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting how they implemented the F-link thing because I'm sure they made one of those. If I can imagine in
yeah,
development, they're like, "Yeah, this is cool. We need a teleporter," and then they're like, "But we probably want more than one."
yeah,
And then
yeah.
they put these little symbols on it to distinguish them, and then gave it made the player remember what
Right.
it's good player agency because it's like, well, you can decide which F-link does what.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
I mean, it's sort of
and then
like, you were speaking of Breath of the Wild earlier. It's sort of like using your markers,
yeah, yeah,
right?
that's
That
the
game
marker
had,
system was great.
yeah,
Yeah.
had that marker system where it's like you can just put those down where but it's up to you to remember what those things mean, you know?
Yeah. Well, they
Um,
also have they only have one, but they have a teleporter
that's
device in
true.
that
Yeah.
game too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. They
um,
should have more.
they should have had more. Yeah, they should have learned from Outcast. 1999's.
Yep.
No, is it 99?
99. Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Whew. Yeah. But yeah, plate spinning. So, it's they do have a quest system kind of in there or a quest list in there. But the interesting thing about once they decided to do the sort of tendril approach and sending you all around, the quest system is per zone.
Yeah.
So, if you are told to go to another place, that quest isn't referenced in the UI in both places.
Right.
So you kind of have to, and they try to describe it, but you
Yeah.
do
You
have to
kind of have to
remember a little
remember.
bit. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
where does this one go? So it definitely it's pushing on its boundaries, and then kind of but I definitely applaud them for doing that kind of stuff. I can see why people kind of became obsessed with this game because it is so vast and so interesting the way that they
Yeah.
set up the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think I mean the last topic we definitely want to talk about I think is the NPCs, which is another way that they really enrich the world.
Yeah.
Sometimes in ways that I wasn't particularly happy with. I don't want to dwell on it, but there was one crying game reference which I just was like, really? I mean, I get it. In 1999, crying game was probably somewhat relevant, relatively speaking, but
Wow, that's weird.
yeah, it was a little weird. I mean, actually, the NPC reacted to it pretty well, which was just I mean, whenever they were like being kind of offensive, the NPCs would treat it as like, "Oh, you're so funny." Like, obviously, like clearly, the answer to your question. Like, why would
Yeah.
you even ask? It's
Yeah.
very there. It was kind of like the aliens were smarter than than Cutter
Yeah,
about a lot of
kind of
things.
commentary on
Yeah,
Americans,
yeah, maybe, yeah.
maybe.
Um, so there was something like that. But in general, I found that NPCs, aside from the sort of science fiction vocabulary soup, I found the and you kind of touched on it before, is that the NPCs really kind of made the world a lot richer, and uh, in a really compelling way for me. I mean, they're all voiced as well. I mean, not all the voice acting is great. There's definitely some where it's like, oh my god, nails on chalkboard performance. But in general, I really enjoyed that. And there was a point at which Jan, who is the son of the first Shamaz you meet and a guardian, you have to go back and talk to him again, and after something bad has happened to that initial area that you start in, I think
Whoa.
Ramzar. Yeah. And it's a whole thing. In fact, Jan and that Shamaz's story goes through the whole game.
Whoa. That's
And
cool.
yeah, it's part of one of those big events with Marion where, like, after you get him on, you get a Marion hologram telling you about the terrible thing that's happening that you have to go deal with. And ultimately, it does take you back to that village of the Guardians where they're hiding out in the mountains, the snowy mountains. So yeah, that was a cool moment. And in fact, you end up having a conversation with that same Shamaz, because the Guardians are like peaceful, and like they're nonviolent. And there's a point where in going into this final battle, Cutter Slade is like, well, we got to go get them now. Like, we're putting both of these worlds in danger by not, if we don't address this immediately. You've got all your Guardians together, and your son, has brought together these other people, the villagers from all these, these places that you've, turned against the Emperor here. And he says, yeah, but we're peaceful. And Cutter says, rules are meant to guide people, not contain them. To survive, you sometimes have to cross that line. And I was like, wow, like, I didn't expect to get there. Like, it was really compelling. It was because of this evolving story throughout the whole game that could land. It was because of the people that I'd met, along the way, who were going to, give me not nearly enough ammo to face the final moments. Yeah. Anyway,
because they're peaceful.
Yeah, because they
only wanted you to shoot a little bit.
Yeah. I shot an awful lot for so.
Yeah. Interesting. That's really cool. And now I'm sad that I didn't get to see sort of the through line to all of that stuff.
I will say the game ends very badly. So
bummer.
It was unfortunate. That was like the high point. It was like, and then everything after that, I was like, ugh, don't like it. Except maybe the post credits and post credits sequences; those were kind of fun.
Well, I mean, but the concept that there are these factions and these different beliefs, and some of them you do meet multiple NPCs that are wanting to become who want to rebel,
right?
And that this sort of evolving state of the world, which is really cool. We talked about it in the first zone when you kind of finish that zone. But I think the NPCs in general, like for an action game like this, albeit as different and weird of one that it is, even just the combat model is very, very unorthodox, I think, for the time.
Yeah.
To have NPCs that are memorable, like I don't think I'll ever remember their names, unfortunately.
Yeah, wow.
But like the leader guy that is in the first world that we talked about, who is a little naive, right? And people,
Mar. Everybody hates Mar.
Yeah, Mar. But it's like, but you kind of understand him, right? You can relate to him.
Yeah.
And then there's various people in the town and the city. The best example for me, that was such a contrasting example, were the two guys that had the boats in the water world. One of them was the one you actually end up doing a quest for, and then he ends up taking you across the water safely. But every time you go with him, he tells you a story. And you're just like, you know what? Good for you. You're proud of your culture. You're proud of your world. You're telling me all the history. And then you talk to the other guy who's right next to him, who I don't think you do anything with. And he's like, hello.
You do later. Yeah.
Oh, you do? Yeah. Okay. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
And he's just like one word answers. And you're like, oh, what? Are you okay? Is anything wrong? No. It's just it's just like really.
It's a very funny thing that happens later, is that at a certain point you need to get to the prison that's across the water. And he's the guy who can take you there. He also takes you to some treasure that has sunk, that you can dive for. But until you actually are going to go to the prison, he gives you all these like one word answers. But then when you're going to go to the prison, he explains this elaborate plan of how you're going to get there. And Cutter's like, wow, I don't think I've ever heard you say that many words in total. And he goes into all, it's a very like, I'm going to do this and this and this, and you're going to do this, and make sure you do this. And then when we do this, I'll do that. And, and then if you need me, do this. And you're like, what? And then you're like, wow, you must really have, feel very strongly about that. And he says, yes. It's just it's a very
it's just really good humor, good writing.
Yeah.
good humor, and not all the performances are up there, but many of them are.
Yeah, many of them are very good. Yeah.
And or just like even like the engineer on the lava planet who like is building windmills and
Right,
bridges,
right.
and
Yeah.
it's like they're like there's these characters that have like careers and real roles, like
Yeah.
let alone all of the priests or whatever you call them,
Right.
the
The Shamazes. Yeah.
shamazes,
The
you
llamas.
know, yeah, and they're all pretty memorable. But then we talked last time about the brothers, the merchants, and
Right.
it's like,
Yeah.
and the
All
fact
relate
that
to
they're
each
all
other.
brothers and they're all
Yeah.
competing. Like you don't need to describe that, but you can,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they did. So it really for the kind of action game that it is, it's very rare for I think because it is definitely like legit action adventure game.
Yeah.
They call it a shooter in many in the GOG store and stuff, but it's really like a traditional action adventure game because there's so much adventure. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's just
One
nice.
last thing on the narrative stuff, and then maybe we'll go to takeaways. Is that one of the things I found happening in the last 10 hours or so of the game is that Cutter's responses to people, like at the beginning, he's very snarky. I remember you mentioning like when he's talking about the Twanha with Zelinus and like how much Zelinus loves the Twanhas, and like Slade's like, well, until I get hungry, and he's like, what?
Yeah.
And he's very snarky like that. And then there's a point at which his tone changes and he becomes much softer and more empathetic with everybody he talks to. I don't think
Oh,
it's systemic because I think it is basically like at the
yeah.
latter ends of quests where you have to have done a lot of stuff like to have even gotten to this point. So there's enough structure in the quests to make it possible for them to cross that line and never cross back.
Hmm.
Um, maybe there might be some like stuff if you didn't do it and like did it late, you get kind of the more crass, um, you know, uh, Cutter. But in general, like what I found was you got towards that end part of the game, and he was really much more sympathetic as a character because he wasn't being such a jerk to everybody, and it felt like he was really involved at this point,
Right.
which
He's
might
he's
echo the player journey. So
respecting them, and
yeah,
I mean that is sort of that's the arc of John Carter as well, right? As
yes, it is. Yeah,
he integrates into the society more. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And he relates to them more in kind of the plight that they're in, and yeah,
Yeah,
and he's definitely helping them over time. He comes in this game. He comes in with the motivation of helping his own planet.
right.
Before we go to takeaways, what's up with Fbrccn? Fbrccn
Okay,
is
yeah, sure.
the scientist from the opening, right?
Yeah, so
And it's
the
time
guy who looks like
travel.
Ming the Merciless at the beginning.
Yeah.
um, yeah, so what it is that there is basically in the order in which the guys went through the portal, they arrived, but they arrived distinct in time. Like you don't all arrive kind of at the same time. Everybody arrives at different times. And
Oh.
so what basically that means is like the first guy who got there, who's the good scientist, I guess, the engineer, I guess, he went through first, and he like was trying to figure out what to do and how to solve this problem of this rift or whatever. And that's then the second guy comes through, and that's Zoo, and he's like the comically evil one at the beginning, and he becomes he's Fbrccn, right? Croax is just the leader of the soldiers. He's just like the big ogre.
Okay.
And so Croax is just like how he's basically his lieutenant that runs the army for him.
Right. Okay.
And Zoo, because he's an inventor, has invented, weapons and things for the soldiers, and that's why they're so powerful, right? And that's like what's going on in the mining areas. Like they're mining the helidium to power the weapons, but they run down over time because this guy's actually not that good of a scientist because he didn't like the thing that he built had this time travel problem, which the original engineer, although he was killed later before you got there by Fbrccn/Zoo, he did figure out what needed to be done, and he recorded a hologram that the Shamazes have that you get at the very end of the game before you go to the
Oh.
final fight. The final fight is you go in, Croax appears, and it is, I'm going to defeat you. Ha ha ha. Now fight some of my minions and kill all the minions. For me, what then happened is I wandered around and nothing was really happening. I was trying to figure out what to do next. Ultimately, I had wandered the whole area again and again and again. I'm like, well, maybe something's just bugged. And I tried to load an old save. I made a new save, tried to load an old save. The game crashed. I was like, aha, maybe I can't finish this game. But when I reloaded my save that I had just made, Croax appeared. So he was supposed to appear when I killed all his guys.
Oh, wow.
And he just didn't, and for whatever reason. And then you kill Croax. And then the rest of the game is cutscenes. Zoo appears. He's like talking to you. He ends up killing Marion.
Whoa.
Yep. She dies to save you. And the Yods basically pull Fbrccn's palace into the depths, and you escape. And then you take all the Mons, which are the computer chips that power the Whatsy to take you back, the probe. In fact, Marion and Slade in their final conversation are like, well, gosh, the probe only has space for one of us to go back. Like, what are we going to do? Well, I guess we'll just kill Marion in the story is what happens.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that's not great. Yeah, I didn't love the end of the story. And then you basically you get in the probe. You say, well, maybe I'll come back this way someday. There was a touching moment where that creature that flies you back from rescuing the Shamaz in the mine world. Did you do that?
I didn't get it. I didn't finish that. No.
Oh, you didn't finish that. Okay, so there's a flying creature that is there at that point that you ride in a cutscene. That thing, it comes and picks up Marion in like this basket they've made for her to take her on her final journey. It's kind of like the river in John Carter. There's a river that they send their dead to, or something like that. At the river Issa,
right. Her
like
to
that.
right. Yeah. She's been reverted, and so her essence has
Exactly.
got to go to the.
It's got to go to the whatever. Yeah. So they do that, and that's that's well done. And then you just basically go. Although you don't see if you get back successfully, so it's like a cliffhanger.
There is a sequel, I think.
There is a sequel, the second something.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. It was way later. It was after the
Yeah, that's right.
1.1 version.
They've been trying to do it for a while, and then eventually,
yeah. The Second Coming, maybe it might be the Second Coming.
I think it is. Yeah.
So I'm probably not going to play it. I didn't come out of the end of the game going, oh, I really want to play another one now. But I did enjoy my time with it. Just the ending of it, between the bug. Like, I spent a lot of time wandering around. Like, I was like, oh, I can see some guards down below that I can shoot. Let me shoot them. Maybe I'm supposed to shoot them. Then some of them would get out of range and I could no longer target or hit them. I'm like, well, I guess that's not what I need to do. And I mean, it was very frustrating.
Wild. Yeah. That's
and then it turned out just to be some random bug that, I only got to because I was like, well, this is frustrating. I guess I'll go and see if I can redo this section if I did something wrong. Or if I just missed a guy or somebody. There was a weird collision with a guy, and I wonder if a guy tunneled through a wall with collision somehow, and so I couldn't kill one guy. So I was like, well, I guess I have to kill all the guys again. But
that problem when somebody you're supposed
gets
to
out of the area, some critical,
that
blood
sounds
locked
like it
character.
could be it.
Yeah. So, but anyway, it all resolved, and I was able to. Let's get to takeaways, shall we? I bet I know what your first one is, sir.
Yes, it gets the usual mini game of guess the ones. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll call it like bold world structure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's what you were guessing, but
That is indeed what I was guessing. Yeah.
yeah. So and we talked about it throughout most of the episodes, but it has been heralded as one of the earliest open world games, and now we know what that means. And I just, for the time, if you place it in this time, the fact that it had the structure that it had. Another like sub note that I had for that is that they also placed the portals in really interesting and motivated places.
Yeah.
So, for instance, some of the portals, like the portal inside the temple grounds in the first zone, that goes into the bases,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it made sense because that's what the soldiers would want, right? They would want to go
Exactly.
from base
Yeah.
to base. So it was really kind of like they actually had storytelling in the placement of those things, even though they were just teleporters. So it wasn't just plopped just kind of
Yeah.
any place.
Oh, and they tell you, the Shamaz tells you like, yeah, you don't want to go through the ones at the temple until you're really ready because it's going to take you someplace dangerous,
Yeah, yeah,
because the
yeah.
soldiers use them. Yeah.
Yeah, so just the world structure really fascinating, and I, as despite it taking the wind out of my sails, they used the world structure with the mission structure really interestingly too, because it did force you to go to new zones before you could finish a mission and get them on. So yeah, the world structure was really fascinating and a surprise, and really really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I put that in my list as well. I'll add on that it is a persistent world structure. So things that you
Yeah.
do, for example, if you kill somebody and
I was wondering about that
yeah,
too, as far as like save states and how they would handle that.
everything is just saved. So any
Yeah.
changes you've made, things you've picked up, of course, some things replenish, like some natural materials that are needed for crafting. Like, so they would, I'm glad they did that because you can imagine running out. So there are some things that replenish, but in general, changes in the world persist and are consistent. When you come back, enemies that you kill are gone forever. They don't, some respawn based on the world state, I think, overall, whether you've
I think the
demoralized the soldiers or
patrols,
not.
yeah,
Yeah, the
but
patrols and things like that.
that's it.
But yeah, I found that all really, really cool. The persistence of it when I kind of started discovering that was super neat. Like the F link kind of depends on that. Like if
Mm.
the F link disappeared when you left the world, and you came back and was like, well, okay, what's the value of that? I can only use it within a world. That would have been endlessly frustrating. But it didn't. And that made me sort of pay attention to like, oh, that must mean they're tracking some other stuff. So that's when I started going back and looking like, yeah, I had a fight here. Oh yeah, look, there's a little bag of metal here. That's from that guy that I killed 10 hours ago and it's still here,
Yeah, right, right.
and I thought that was to add on to the overall world structure, which I agree was super cool. And the forest world is like the one that's super remote. Like there's only one way to get to it. And the same with the mountain area that you start in. Like there's only one way to those places. But there are other ways in between the other ones that are more direct, which is also cool. So
Yeah,
yeah,
really
pretty nifty. Pretty nifty.
inspired stuff. Yeah. My second one is also obvious, but it's the reason, one of the main reasons we played the game, and I ended up really enjoying voxels, and it was such a different, as we've already talked about quite a bit. It's such a different version of the technology than Minecraft, and used in such a different way. Um, that and there were a few games that really used it in the way that Outcast used it in this era. Delta Force being another one, which was a first-person shooter, and also like very weird. My memory of it, I did actually play that back in the day, and but for this game, it really like ended up the voxels, albeit their version of how they wanted to generate terrain and stuff. It ended up being part of the aesthetic for me too. Like
Yeah.
when you play it for a couple hours, you buy it. It becomes you become convinced by it, especially because it was an alien planet and it was a lot of terrain based stuff. The audio design is good, so when you walk on certain surfaces, it reinforces what the voxels look like, whether it's dirt grass or whatever, rock, and it really like sold this world for me. It felt vast. I think it helped the draw distances, as we've talked about, and other things. And so it one of the things we talk about a lot on the podcast are when decisions like this, technology, design, art, all of these things come together nicely and complement each other. It felt like voxels for this game ended up complementing what they were trying to do. Whatever their motivation was for picking voxels, it ended up working for me.
Yeah, that's a good one. It was not on my list, but it's an excellent one. Um, because of course it's because they never used voxels for the things I thought they'd use it for. I kind of like, that's weird choice. And kind of a backwater evolutionarily, but still, I agree with everything you said about them. My second one is the power of dynamic systems in play, which is a fancy way of saying I really liked how things like the music worked, um, or even just like asking directions to other Talon, right? Like
Oh
you go
yeah.
find a generic NPC and he's like, well, he's this direction and this, and they have different ways of saying how far they are. And we talked about that, I think, last episode, so I won't belabor it, but those things really enriched my experience while I was playing dramatically. Like
Hmm.
once I got that's what that was doing, I was like, that's so cool. Like, in
Hmm.
1999 that they were like, well, we don't have this infinite voice budget for every NPC to be able to say, where somebody is relative to them. How can we string that together in a dynamic way? That super worked for me. And that one actually really hit me. And then, of
It's
course, as I
interesting to
mentioned,
think
yeah,
about the system behind it.
yeah, yeah. It's like, well, I mean, the game knows where that, other NPC is. Like I said, it's this sort of simulation-y aspect of this game. It's a very narrative game with nonetheless some simulation aspects in how the world actually communicates itself to you that I think are super cool. And the music, crossfading between, well, not crossfading, fading out and fading up between different states on the basis of what was around you, and
Hmm.
things like that. I thought was super great. You feel it a lot, especially in the city because it's very dense. Um, and so you'll know information about what's going on based on where you are and what you're hearing. Because they don't have a lot of channels to play. If you were playing in 1999, right, you don't have like this crazy amount of audio channels that you can play with. You maybe have 2 or 4 or something like that. And they're using that very carefully, not just with the music, but also with other incidental audio. It might be 8, who knows? But like it's a limited number. Today, it's basically, everything. You've got these software mixers that like mix tons of stuff to a complicated mix. Back then, it's like, well, we've got however many channels, and we can only
Hmm.
use those. How do we manage that to talk to the player? And that felt really well treated, including things like the Foley and all of that. So anyway, I appreciated those instances of dynamic stuff in a very bespoke game.
Yeah, that's a good one too. It's an interesting mix of that simulation feel, and yeah, it's an interesting mix of a lot of things, to be
Yeah,
honest. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, okay, my last one, which is also no surprise, and it relates to our kind of NPC conversation, but I'm bringing it up to a high level point of just um, world building focus in an action game, and hits the some of the dialogue stuff you're just talking about too, but just being very surprised, like because I had always had this described to me as an action game, and in many cases people would call it kind of a shooting game, and that is one of your main verbs. There are other verbs which I didn't really use that much, but also talking to NPCs, how many quests there are, how elaborate the world building is for the planet. Which if you're doing a John Carter story, you're going to want. But then also how clever they were with how they strung some of the missions together, and how they even turned, like again, my best example still are the gun merchants, how they turned simple concepts that are in every game at that time into something that could tell a story.
Hmm.
Because now it's like I see those guys in the purple, purple robes, and I'm like, oh, they're the brothers, and they have this thing with their dad. It's
Yeah, yeah,
like I have an identity for them, and it tells this. So there's just a lot of great world building stories in the middle of this game that I just would not have expected it. And we already talked about a lot the memorable NPCs. So yeah, it was the sense of place was there, and I felt like I really did culture, religion, like all the different things, as challenging as some of them are as far as the way that they represented them, that they were very fleshed out, and the concept of essences and the yods, and like
yeah.
all those things was really cool.
Well, mine echoes that as well. I just called it lots of story to enhance the world, and I think I would basically just echo everything you just said. I don't have a lot to add. I do think that the parts that you didn't see, especially with Cutter changing over time,
Yeah, that's cool.
were really was like that's really good story writing. Good narrative. His relationship with Marion, of course, is also changing. You're learning about her story and like what's gone on between them, and that has him have such animosity at the beginning. Like, there's lots of stuff there that does kind of come out. There's kind of not all that much interaction between him and Marion, which is the one thing I think is a little tricky. Like I kind of wanted more. Because
Yeah.
she ends up being kind of she's not really a damsel in distress because she's generally getting herself out of the situation she's in, and in fact even coming to your rescue later. But it's just like they're very self-contained moments. It's like when so there's the barrier in that first area eventually goes down and she's in there. That's one time where you have to rescue her, and then of course for me the next thing that happened was her rescuing me, and handing me a gun and saying, "Okay, you get these people out of here," and
Hmm.
I'll catch up with you and stuff like that. So, um, it was I maybe just wanted a little more of that, but other than that, I think that it all worked really, really well, and it did feel to me like this was a person who was just like as you point out, John Carter was growing and changing as he became more invested in this world. And like I said, that paralleled my own investment in the world. I still don't like the language, like everything's named these different things and like all the
Yeah.
terminology. I don't love that. I never love that. That's just me. Like, ugh, you're like, don't call it a mon. Just call it a word that means something to me, please. So things like that, I still have a trouble getting over. But it's a choice that people can make, right? And that I respect that they wanted to make their choice. I just don't particularly have a taste for it. But yeah, but if that one thing had been fixed, it like would have been kind of in a lot of ways a pretty ideal game, on a story perspective for me. Some lots of little issues, and of course the broad one of colonialization, that's a problem, but that also comes from the source material and you're emulating that. You kind of buying that when you're buying that as part of the whole package. But lovely
Yeah.
lovely game generally. So glad we
Yeah.
played it. Glad we played it. And I back in the day, I never was inclined to play it. I mean, I remember it, but I was like, I don't know if that's for me, and because I was shifting to console as well. But now I'm really glad we did.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd always heard, I think I mentioned on the first episode, Anthony Gallegos from One Up, not One Up, from Rebel FM
Right.
podcast, who, listened to for years. And I know he would always bring it up like as one of his favorite games from his youth. He's younger than me. And I was in my head, I was like, really? I was like, why? Why?
Yeah.
And I know now. I know. I can totally see why. That this makes a mark. And it's mainly just because my own preconceived notions about what it was, which were unfair. So yeah, they did a great job.
All right. Well, that wraps up Outcast. We have a next game maybe picked out. I have to verify some stuff about it tomorrow in terms of availability, but if it is, we will make that announcement probably shortly thereafter in the Discord. So that's a pre-plug for the Discord. We also have an email this week. I do want to get to it because it remains somewhat timely. And this was, of course, sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. I'm going to let you read it, sir, because that's what we do here.
Okay. I wasn't sure where you're going to go with this one. Okay. It says here the subject is called Legacies from one Mr. E. Deep, I think is how you pronounce
Yeah,
it.
that could be it. That could be it. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
always hard to tell with these foreign
Or
names.
Dipe. I think it's Mr. E. Dipe is how I'm going to say it. No, really, it's Mystery Dip. Hi, Brett and Tim. The recent unexpected and sudden passing of our mutual friend had me reflecting on legacies as it pertains to the gaming world. I apologize in advance for its length. There's a quote that goes something like, "At some point, you and your friends gamed together for the last time and didn't know it." Wow. Okay. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through this one.
If you have to hand it off, I can pick up at some point. Let me go find it.
That's an interesting quote. I would, if it is really a quote, I kind of be interested to know where it's from. I was in a squad in college. We were a pretty tight group. I remember getting shipped a box of games and joysticks from them, from one of them, because I couldn't afford much at the time. I even got one of my first jobs from a member there. But then the game we are mutually enjoyed got shut down by the publisher, and a slow dispersion started happening. Some grouped around other games, others drifted off. Forums dedicated to the game shut down. I lost touch with pretty much all of them, as it predated social media and even Steam. One of the reasons I got into game dev originally was a dream to remake that game and bring the group back together. But I think by this point, I just have to resolve that chapter of my life is closed. Wow, that's an interesting motivation there, and very cool. I'm also reminded of asynchronous multiplayer and how it lets us play with people who may not be around either at the moment or gone forever. There's a great story of a son who played a racing game with his dad, and his dad's ghost car, quote unquote, had the record for this one track. Every time he raced it, it was like playing with his dad again. He was finally good enough to beat his dad's time, but he stopped short of the finish line. Holy cow. He stopped short of the finish line so he wouldn't erase the car. Link in the show notes.
Yeah. Apparently. Do you want me to pick up from here so you can breathe?
I'll soldier forward.
Right.
Mystery, you jerk. In that vein, there's also sharing this hobby with the next generation. I love when my kids want me to play games with them. We've beaten several games like Mario and Kirby as a team, and just yesterday they completed one by themselves for the first time, start to finish. It's also great watching them try old games I used to play, and the anticipation of their reaction to plot twists or surprises or figuring out a puzzle. There's also the legacy of the development side. Today's game creation tools stand on the shoulders of giants. We started with Pong! Exclamation point. Just thinking about that sometimes is awe-inspiring. Legends of the past push the boundaries of what was possible, taking us from text to full 3D engines. But beyond that, we also have narrative, level design, audio, and a host of other disciplines. We've invented whole genres. People are interacting in ways not possible before, like VR or options for visually impaired players. The game dev students of today have a master class of examples to study from the cream of the crop over the past 40 years. My focus on my own game creation has changed after having kids. I used to make games I want to play, but now I strive to make games they want to play, or we can play together. I found I get more enjoyment out of watching others have fun with something I created than me playing it myself. My goal would be to make a game that has enough staying power that the kids who play it now are able to share it with their own kids someday. That's a great goal. Finally, we have the stories passed on by people who interacted with us. I thought it was amazing that everyone that said something about him, being Belmont, has mentioned his positivity. He was he was always eager to see what new things were being worked on or encourage people's pursuits. I've typically been a sarcastic or cynical person, and it's easy to do that, especially with our current world. But I want to strive to be as positive as he was. And if nothing else, I think making others want to be better is a great legacy on its own. Regards, Mystery Dip.
Bet you feel pretty good about making fun of his name now.
yeah. I wasn't going in. Wasn't going into that mail fully understanding what was about to happen. So
yeah. Well, that's why I have you read these because I remember once I got to read. I think it was from Mark Garcia, and I was like, I could barely get through it. So yeah, it's very heartfelt, and I appreciate the mail mystery. It's I was reflecting on a lot of the same things, both because of Belmont's passing, but also just reading this email when it came in. I think last week, so I've had a little more time with it, of course, than you, Tim. I guess it was late last week.
So. Yeah, it's a really, really excellent mail, and it just hits kind of all the. I think, yeah, I mean the subject is perfect because it is. There's so many different ways to think about legacy and what you do leave. However things have happened for your life, and especially if you create things, and obviously we think about that a lot and what the impact. And I guess the podcast is about how things have impacted the future or the present. And
when we streamed, at the charity stream with Belmont, that was like getting to see some of my legacy on screen, right? And see somebody who was playing it for the first time in 2025, 24 years after it came out, or whatever, 2083, I guess. I think it came out in 2002, but just like it was remarkable because I hadn't seen it in probably 10 years or more, and it was really touching to me. And thinking about, like, as I was talking through all the different things I remembered from the development, and if we had played through the whole game, I'm sure I would have had stories like the whole time through. We didn't even talk about like things about like some of the level design. There's a little chain of missions later that all tie together that I think is some of the coolest stuff we did on those two games. And I think holds up pretty well in terms of what's going on, especially if you have the emotional attachment to Nim from the first game, because it ties back into stuff that happened in the first game. And it's it was just remarkable seeing all of that and feeling that feeling that part of my life be kind of alive in the moment at that time. So that was a gift he gave to me. So
yeah, for sure. And watching it through his eyes too, kind of as we were doing the stream, I was watching Belmont's face, too, as he was like taking it all in. And to your point about like, and the legacy point in general, one thing I've noticed about myself, and you mentioned you hadn't seen the game in a while, 10 years or whatever. In general, once I have stopped working on a game, I very rarely touch it again.
Oh,
like
yeah,
I
me
just
too.
I just move on. Like I just move forward. And so anytime I see it again, like when we played Republic Commando for the podcast, like that was definitely seeing something far into the future. So yeah, it's interesting to see Jedi Starfighter there, because it was like, oh yeah, that's what this game was. And then all the both great things that came about and all the challenges we had.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for that, Mystery. Always like to put him through the ringer, so I appreciate it. That was, of course, as I said, sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. We also love to have your reviews. I get the Apple ones. If you're sending it somewhere else, some platform that has that, just let us know. And then some, I think, just sort of like recommendations or whatever. If you got a moment and want to do that on whatever podcaster you use, that would be great. It helps us reach new listeners. We're on the web at devgameclub.com. And my co-host here, when he can, Twitch is at twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
I think you had gone back to what? I don't actually remember. I guess you played some Castlevania recently. The last one okay. I played, was in honor of Belmont. All right, and last week you were Power Outage. So
Power Outage. Yeah. So no, but my intention will be to go back to Dark Souls 2.
Okay, cool. I hope people get a chance to enjoy that. That will probably be on the day this releases. We have a fan-run Discord. I've already mentioned some people from there, but you can see lots more folks. It's a good community if you'd like to be part of that. And occasionally they provide us with episodes as they did last week. So thanks to our interviewers there, Belmont and Calamity Nolan and Lost Lake, their guest.
Bioshock. Or biostats. Sorry. You said Belmont. Sorry.
I did. I'm sorry. You obviously got him on the brain. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, the Discord, merch store, the charity event website, all by Mark Garcia. Have fun finding new uses for Gorg Resort this week, and good night.
Good night.